Better Preach, episode 76, The Power of Preparation and Practice with Katie Hartfiel. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a podcaster, speaker, and consultant, and I'm so excited to join you on your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. Katie Hartfiel is a speaker's speaker. She was called by God to speak, has many years of experience, is a mentor to others in big conference situations, and works really, really hard on each talk before she steps on stage. And it was the combination of the hours of preparation and many times of practicing talks that I really think sets Katie apart in this regard. Her process is really inspiring and super practical. There's something for each of us to learn and to imitate. Katie Hartfiel received her theology degree from Franciscan University of Steubenville and spent the following 7 years serving as a youth minister in Houston. She now feels blessed to spend her days with her husband, Mark, and their 4 children, while still getting to travel to speak about Jesus. She has a great website. I'd love for you to check that out at womaninlove.org. And before we start, please be sure to stop by and say hi on Instagram at Better Preach. All one word. Would love to connect there. Let's get started. Katie Hartfiel, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. You're welcome. So as we do so often to start off the podcast, I want to get a sense of worst or first. It's dealer's choice. Wait,
Awesome.
no, that's not dealer. I'm the dealer. So it's not my choice. It's your choice. I'd love to hear a story about
Great.
either your first talk or one of the first kind of big talks and how that went, or maybe one of the worst talks and what you learned from it.
Yeah. The first talk that I remember giving, I was actually in high school, and my youth minister was really, he was really, really wonderful. But one of the best gifts that he gave to me was just the bug for evangelizing in general.
Oh,
And he
cool.
gave me so many different opportunities to learn ministry and to exercise youth ministry, even as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. So I remember vividly the first talk that I gave was confirmation retreat. I was a senior in high school and talking about, still to date, my favorite topic, talking about the true presence of the Eucharist right before adoration. And I just remember feeling like in that moment, like, this is what the Spirit like wants me to do. Like, I have this gift of talking a lot for a long time. And I always joke, if I could go back to the main thing that I got in trouble for growing up in school was talking when I shouldn't be, and talking too long and talking too much. If I could go back and tell all of my teachers that punished me for talking too much. People pay me to talk now. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, here's a 30-minute stretch. You just keep on going. But yeah, I remember that feeling of standing there and just feeling the Spirit, and something that I was so passionate about, getting to share it with other people. And that was also something, as when I was a youth minister, I would try to give opportunities to my teens as well to have the chance to experience the Spirit working through them, and what it's like to preach and to preach truth.
How did it go? I mean, it had a sense of like, I was kind of made for this. I love this.
Yeah.
The Spirit is moving. What was, when you sat back down, or do you even remember kind of how it went, looking back?
I don't really remember like specifics, but I do remember that there were several conversations with the kids who were on retreat afterwards that they came up and I was a peer, especially at that time too, so like wanting to talk about specific things I said, or like saying that there was something that was ignited in their heart, or that they hadn't heard before. And that's the best part of any kind of ministry, is not standing on the stage with the microphone, but being able to journey with people, have those conversations, individuals, and those kinds of things. So I guess it went well in some capacity.
Yeah.
Of some sort.
You said that your youth minister kind of gave you the bug for evangelizing. How did that unfold?
Yeah, he was really, really fantastic.
Mm.
Older, his kids were my age and really took
Mhm.
us under his wing, not in like the traditional, like he wasn't cool. He was
Yeah.
kind of a dork. And
Yeah.
but just so genuinely loved the Lord. And also did have a gift for the ways that he explained things and the ways that he designed like our youth nights and things like that. And so
Mm.
when I would come to him and talk about it, and he would ask my opinion and my thoughts and my ideas, and if I was
Mm.
like, what if we do this, or what if we do a skit? He's like, yeah, do it, get it together, let's make it happen. And we would go into
Wow.
his office. He really mentored us, not just talking at us or things like that, but really developing a discipleship, teaching us how to disciple as well.
What an incredible gift. And it
Oh,
seems, it's interesting. I've asked this question of many people over the last couple of years. And so often it's in high school
yeah.
where they first have that, people like yourself who are doing this as the
Yeah.
main thing that you're doing in serving the church, in a ministry of teaching and speaking and preaching. And it's really interesting how often there's a correlation there
Right.
that somebody else identifies. Either you've had a powerful conversion,
Hmm.
and somebody says, you want to tell others about it in high school. And
Right.
so that's been kind of a neat common thread. Just as
Yeah.
you were sharing that, I thought, wow, so often that is the case, and so crucial that you had that experience kind of early on. What was your conversion experience like? What sort of led you even
Yeah.
into that place where you believed as strongly as you did in the real
Yeah.
presence?
I think I always loved the Lord, and I wanted to be good, and I wanted to do right by him and all those things, but I
Yeah.
never knew just the joy and the beauty and the consolation, the meaning and suffering and all of those sorts of
Yeah.
things. Until in high school, I was at a Steubenville youth conference and in adoration, and just really had this
Uh,
profound, not really expected either, like that I was going like looking for this emotional experience or anything like that, but adoration, the monstrance right before me, and just feeling so convicted. I'm praying right now, and this is the God of the universe that's hearing my
mm,
prayers. We're in this exchange, and that awakening of the Eucharist in that moment was something I could never go back to not knowing.
mm,
I have a theory, as you're saying that too, about youth ministry and high school and those kinds of things. I think that teenagers, as difficult as it can be, it's really the sweet spot in our life where we're still childlike. We still have a lot of ability to have a childlike faith,
mhm.
but we're also have a depth. And so it's this marriage sort of in our life, like the singular
Yeah.
time where we're not as jaded and you're not as serious, and you can be childlike, but you can also go really into a profound place. And I think that what I see working with teens over the last 20 years, that like God just is able to move so beautifully through this incredible openness of faith, but also like, I'm going to take you somewhere. Um, and that was what I was experiencing personally, but also within the lives of all the teens that I've worked with. And I think when you're speaking too, that's like such a fun place to be, because you can be funny and light, but you can also say, I'm gonna
Mm,
punch you in the gut. Like
mm,
it's coming. I'm gonna give you some hard truth and
yeah.
some hard things to think about. And being able to see the Lord soften those hearts and move through it's really, really special.
What was that like to go from that kind of profound transformation as a teenager in the midst of a Steubenville youth conference to later then speaking at
Oh
that
gosh.
same conference? What was that like
Yeah.
that first time that you
Oh,
spoke at a Steubenville conference, and what was that experience like in light
yeah.
of your past?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a Steubenville junkie also. So that was like my first experience, but then I went all through high school.
Oh, sure.
I worked at the conference office when I was in college. I was a youth minister, went every year. So I think I had a baby one year during the same weekend as the Steubenville conference when I was youth minister, and that's like the only one that I've missed
Sure. Yeah.
since I was in high school.
Yeah.
So when the opportunity came for me to speak at the Steubenville conference, my first conference, I was like a wreck. It was
Mm,
awful. Hadn't slept in days, and but just feeling this immense, like, I mean, gift. But also I just can't believe that God's allowing me to continue um to be a part of something that profoundly changed my life. It's overwhelming to think about. the way that God knew it all from the very beginning. And I share that story a lot, obviously, within of my own experience when I'm speaking at the Steubenville conferences. It's just, yeah, I could have never ever imagined.
Were you intimidated, or did you have enough experience and exposure with conferences that it just sort of felt natural?
Yeah, no, I was extraordinarily intimidated and extraordinarily nervous. I still, probably not to that degree, but I'm still always sick to my stomach before I give a big talk. Sometimes even small talks. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a person that's like, oh yeah, this is just what I do and I got this.
Yeah.
It's very nerve-wracking and put a lot into that. But so that first year that I spoke at the Steubenville conference. I remember the phone call. They're like, yeah, we'd love to work with you. We're going to have you give the women's session, which I expected, and the Saturday night keynote at the St. Louis Mid-America Conference, which is the biggest conference. So the Saturday night keynote, I was like, are you guys sure?
Yeah.
So, but I think even at that time, I mean, it felt like so much pressure. But to date, it's the easiest time slot, I think, for any kind of conference, even though it feels like it's all this pressure. But at this point, when you're right about to go into adoration, a lot of the
Yeah.
walls have been broken down. They're excited.
Right.
And I always feel like you walk up there and they're like, whatever you say, I believe you. Just give it to me. So it's really the one to go for the
Yeah.
jugular. And those talk on the passion and death of Jesus and leading into adoration. And I felt like that was one of those ones too, where like the Holy Spirit stripped me so far down, where I was so desperate for him that I had to rely on him to do it. And I think it went pretty well. So I felt good about it.
What was that stripping down or invitation to rely on him more? What was going on there?
Yeah, generally in those moments, it's like I haven't slept in so long. I'm like such a nervous wreck. I feel all of this self-doubt. Like, there's no way that I can do this. No shred of like, I've got this left within me that you just have to say, this might go terribly. And so I'm just going to have to let it go. It's going to be what it is. And giving the Spirit the freedom within that. But when I have a choice, when I'm like, oh yeah, I've totally prepared and I've put all of this, into it, then I'm much less likely to be open to whatever the Spirit's doing in that moment. So.
Yeah, that's such an interesting dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know that the Lord wants us to be confident, but not arrogant. And,
right. It's hard.
Prepared, but not over prepared. And,
Exactly.
Use our gifts, but rely on it. It is such an interesting paradox. I don't like to go into those situations where I feel like you're describing.
Yeah.
And yet so often it seems like those are the moments where I pray a little more fervently. And even that alone seems to do something that every talk needs.
Right.
So are there practical things in light of that kind of tiredness, or kind of like, I don't know if I have it? What do you do, to kind of combat that or deal with that?
Yeah. I don't know that I do anything. Actually, it's really kind of more of just an embracing. And I'm a person, I prepare a lot. I spend a lot of time. I am not someone that is ever like, oh yeah, just prayed and I'm going to walk up there and, the Holy Spirit's going to do his thing. I work really hard. And especially on these kinds of like big conferences and things like that, I feel like I'm studying for finals. It's just, I work really, really hard on all that.
What does that look like?
I think that
I'd
gives
love to
me
hear.
I mean, my process is pretty involved. And I think everybody has, their different ways that they go about things. And, but if I've given, especially a talk that, it's different. Like if you're going to go give a talk to like a mom's group of 50 people, you don't want it to be like this very polished, like then it's weird. You're in a parish hall or something like that. So there's different processes for each. But I'm giving a conference talk. I'll start as far in advance as I can, just so that I'll have plenty of time to
couple of
pray
months
with. Yes, definitely. So I don't feel the pressure to like make all of these big, theological insights right away, but to have a lot of time just to pray with whatever the topic is. There's always a scripture passage, usually a scripture story. Sit with that, do a lot of, Lectio Divina, and then I research a lot. So what are other people saying, listening to other talks about it, looking at some, different articles and things like that. What are the meanings behind this? What are the different connections, to different things, and ending up with a ton of material, and then going through and trying to sort through all of it and decide how does everything fit together. And I think that that's something that I'm really passionate within writing a talk too, is ordering things in a certain way for there to be a flow, for there to be smooth transitions and things like that, so that everything can connect back to your point that you're trying to make the whole time, which also, again, I mean, it takes a lot of time and really inserting yourself into whatever that message or whatever that scripture passage is. So my favorite thing within it, I think about this all the time doing ministry for so long. Just I think you receive so much more than you give when you're doing ministry, that I could go and give a 30-minute talk, and maybe there's something somebody remembers from it, or maybe there's the emotion or something that's awakened, but hopefully that's leading into a relationship with the Lord. But what I've done at that point is I've spent probably 40 to 60 hours on this talk and on this scripture passage and whatever. And I remember vividly every single one of the scripture stories and what I've received from it, from every talk of like big talk that I've given over the last, several years or whatever. Just how much God has moved in my own heart. And when that happens too, like you're so excited to be able to tell other people about it. This is what God is. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
God's revealed all of these things about his love and his mercy and his goodness and conviction and all these things. I cannot wait to tell you about it. And that comes out, I think, when you spend a lot of time within it. So.
And having done multiple Steubenville, maybe, I don't know if you've done the same talk in the same slot the same year. I don't know if that's ever
almost
happened.
Always.
Oh, okay. So you might do multiple conferences, same talk, same slot.
Yes.
But then year to year, different talks, different slot, different scripture.
Right.
Do you feel like they overlap at all for you? And just in terms of preparation, that's a lot of work to put into a big keynote. Or are they kind of pretty distinct ideas that you're kind of building a brand new thing each time?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of both. So I try really hard not to make them just like a boxed shtick talk. When I do a chastity talk at a high school in a parish or whatever, it's the same. It's going to be the same thing every time. But I try to approach them, fresh and not try to force different things into. But there's a lot of things that are going to naturally, my own story, my own testimony, different things like that. Certain things that I'm really, really passionate about are generally going to pop up more often. Like my favorite Eucharistic miracle story, I think I've told it probably like 4 out of the last 6 summers. Because I love sharing it, and it fits and it works, but I try really hard not to force those things to happen. So.
Yeah. As you're preparing, what sort of tools do you use? Are you pen and paper, or is it digital tools? What do you use to actually like gather this research, and where does it live as you're preparing it?
Great question. Fun to think about and talk about, because everybody has such a different process. I usually will start online and start like in a Word doc, copy and pasting all kinds of stuff until I have like this gigantic document, and then I'm pen and paper. Personally, I'm a very hands-on learner anyway. So when I'm writing, I feel like it's really internalizing, and I'm getting a better understanding of what I'm doing and helping myself remember it and things like that. So I'll have like a notebook that's just pages and pages and pages of where I'm reworking. And then I'll go back to the computer, and I usually try to type out the talk like word for word, if I could just give it exactly how I wanted to, and what's a better word here, a better phrase, or I kind of already made that point. Try to craft it exactly as I would want to deliver it, and then I go back to the pen and paper in order to help myself like study it and really I pretty close memorize as much as I can. And I think also like then when all of these anxieties and these fears and all of these things are creeping in, it's not for lack of preparedness. It's not for lack of, any of those areas that could have been within my control that I didn't take responsibility for earlier.
Sure.
So at least I can let that part go. And then when you're on the stage and you get going and you know where you're going, and then the Holy Spirit gives you something in that moment. Okay, I can develop this, but then I know how to get back to what I was saying before. It gives a lot more confidence in the moment to trust.
It's interesting. It kind of goes digital, analog, digital, analog. What do you take with you on stage? And I want to learn about the memorizing concept because there's so many different schools of thought about how that works. And then I'm curious how that works for you. But what do you bring with you on stage? What's the finished product?
I always love seeing what everybody else has to it, like
Yeah.
a geek kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have to have one sheet of paper that's handwritten, and I try to make it the least amount of words possible. If it's a story I'm telling, I know the story. I know what I'm going to say. So I'll just write one word and in an outline form. And then if there's something where I know that I get hung up or something that I want to, maybe it's like a list or something, maybe like once per talk, there's something where I want to say this exactly like this. So I'll write it still as concise as I can, but then highlight just that one spot with a star. But I try to keep it to one piece of paper, handwritten with a great pen, my favorite pen.
What is it? What's your favorite
It's
pen?
like a great gel black pen. So you see it well, you see it easily.
Sure.
I put it on a music stand. I put the music stand all the way down, turn it to the side so I can walk over and kind of reference, but not have to walk behind it and look and see, But yeah, and then if I'm writing it out and I make a mistake, I rip it out. I want it clean, perfect.
Do you really?
Yes. Like the least amount of words where I'm going to be able to see what I'm looking for, no distraction in the moment.
So getting to that point, talk to me about memorizing.
Yeah.
And then do you practice with a piece of paper like that? Or so what does memorizing and practicing look like? Because it seems like those would go hand in hand to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah. So again, writing is really the way that I, even when I was in school and I would study, I would write things over and over. So generally in that same notebook, I'll just write it. Try to write it without looking at, I'll have my copy that I have printed out of like, if I were to say it exactly how I wanted to, this is sitting here. And then I'll see how much I can write without looking. And then once I get a certain section where like, okay, I got this, then I'll go and start the next section. Okay, how far can I get in this section? And block that out. So, and I'll practice. I try to practice a reasonable amount because sometimes if you practice too much, then it's robotic and it sounds rehearsed.
Sure.
So, I don't usually practice my stories unless I think it's going to be a long story. And then I could go on for too long if I don't know exactly which parts of the story is important, but I don't usually practice those. But especially like the main point that I really, really want to get across, I'll be pretty diligent about that. So making sure I say it exactly how I want.
So is that like you kind of run through it from memory 5 times or 10 times or 2 times, or what's the number?
It depends on what I'm doing. Probably, well, one of the other big factors that comes in with practicing it is timing it. So and I'll time everything in sections also. So my intro, and then I'll write down, okay, that intro was 3 minutes long. This story was 4 minutes long. And then you can see pretty easily, like I spent too much time. If you need to cut, sometimes you think a talk is 30 minutes and all of a sudden, no, that was 40 minutes talk, or that was 20 minutes talk, which that's happened to me multiple times as well. I think probably in general, maybe between 5 and 10, and a given like keynote of how many times I'm going to go through in time and make sure that it's.
Do you do that on your own, or do you have someone who listens?
Yeah.
Or what does that look like?
So usually on my own. So my husband, Mark, he's been doing ministry forever too. He's the vice president of Paradise to Stay, which is the ministry that puts out That Man Is You.
Oh yeah, of course.
So he was the first hire there. He's been there forever. He does a ton of speaking also. So generally at the beginning, when I get the talk where I'm like, okay, I think this is good. And so I go through all of it with him. And he usually has like the 2 main things that are like, say this and this, and then that's going to like bring it all together. So usually when I have like the really great moment, it's Mark's idea. So I'll do that with him at the very beginning.
Awesome.
And then right before, a couple weeks before, I'll give it to him, which is always super awkward. Like you feel so dumb giving a talk to one person and then you're like telling a joke or a story and he like moderately smiles because he's heard this story like 100 times. It can psych you out a little bit. But there's been times with him too, like we get towards the end and he's like, yeah, it's not good. And he'll tell me, and this is why, this is whatever, which is really difficult. But then it always makes it better. I appreciate it, but I always want to go through it several times on my own before I get his honest opinion
Yeah,
at the end.
it's a pretty vulnerable thing to do,
Yes.
especially in the awkwardness of the one-on-one and the grand familiarity you have with one another.
Yes.
I mean, that is really tough. It's so good that
Yeah.
you do that. So when he says, Katie, that wasn't great. Do you know it?
Usually,
And you're not surprised, or has he ever caught you completely off guard? Like you thought you were rolling, this thing was working, and he's like, ugh.
Probably not completely. Usually, especially if you've talked through it enough times and you feel, this part is dragging. This kind of already said, I don't know if this is going to work. This analogy, I don't know. So usually I'm already questioning it, but
Sure.
Yeah.
And I trust he knows you well enough. He knows how to deliver criticism in a way that will land.
He does.
Well, you guys have like a secret weapon, in each other. Now he's not on the podcast right now, but does he use a similar approach to practicing for his talks? And are you his sounding board sometimes, or what does that look like?
Yes. So it's very similar the way that he prepares. I don't listen to his talks as much because he's pretty niche within men. So a lot of times he'll listen. I'll be like, that doesn't do anything for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But sometimes he'll run through like a specific. Well, I mean, he talks about his talks a lot, I guess is the thing. We talk about it a lot, but I don't necessarily listen to him deliver it.
Yeah.
So when we talk about it, there'll be things where I'm like, oh, how about this? Oh my gosh, that's great. That would be really helpful. But I don't necessarily listen to his delivery. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, kind of secret weapon.
Yeah,
you're both
for sure.
you're both doing that, and that's so cool.
Yes.
I have found the most variety of approaches in people that I've spoken to the last couple of years is around this whole question of memorization, practice, and it really seems to depend on the person and kind of how they're wired. If you can put in the effort, I imagine you feel like it really pays off. In the end,
it's a huge deal, and whether you're memorizing it or not, but like at least feeling like I know where I'm starting, where I'm going. I'm staying focused on where I'm going the entire time that I'm talking, and I'm going to land in this area that's going to pull it all back together, whether that's word for word or not. But I think having the flow and spending the time to like know what that flow is really, really helpful.
Well, it sounds like you do have a very, I love it. Because my brain works so much like what you're describing, short of multiple practice sessions. And I would never give a talk in front of my wife. That would be frightening. I just couldn't do it.
That's great.
She doesn't have the attention span. She loves me, but not in that way. So, but I'm wondering, does your process where it's at today, is that where it was, say, 20 years ago?
Yes.
15 years ago?
Yeah, it's changed.
So this
very
is
little.
So it wasn't like you took this long, circuitous route, made all these mistakes, and like, hey, I got to change up. It's just kind of who you are.
I think it's what works for me. I mean, as I said, like studying in school, it's how I studied. So and also I think first and foremost, like I love to write. And so I've always loved to write, even from the time I was really young. And so that is kind of where I find so much joy. And then I'm like, oh, now I have to figure out how I'm going to remember all of this just to be. I mean, I love to write and talk. Like the in between part is not quite that enjoyable, but so I enjoy the process of putting it all together. So
awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier before we started recording that now one of your roles is you're not just one of the new folks on the team. You're someone who's now mentoring people coming up, and so now they're looking at you, and you've been around forever. You're one of the OGs, so to speak. So what's that been like?
Oh man.
And can you take us into a conversation a mentoring conversation,
Sure.
the kinds of things that you're helping them with, who are maybe giving a Steubenville conference talk for the first time or the second time. What does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah. Oh man, I love it so much. I think one of my favorite things, like I guess in speaking in general, is when I can share, like, listen, everybody, I'm a mess. Let me just tell you about the
Hmm.
mess that I am. And I think that that's also what's like so beautiful in the mentoring process of like, okay, let me tell you the areas that I have struggled, the feelings that I was feeling when you were first starting, the things that all of those, like calling them out or the questions or like, what am I going to wear? Things that feel like stupid
Sure.
questions or whatever. And speaking into those areas. So there's like that aspect of it. These are probably your fears. These are probably the things you're worried about. What questions do you have for me in those areas? And then talking through the talk writing process and not trying to impose my talk writing process on them, but like, here's some things to think about. Here's some things. I was just I'm mentoring a new speaker this year. So we were just talking and just a couple like tips, like try to come up with an image, whether it's a story that you tell within the talk, whether it's an analogy. Um, what is something that can be this ribbon that runs through everything that you are talking about, keeps it all cohesive. And then at the very end, again, you can bring it all back together and tie it all, back. What's something like that? Or make sure you have a moment in the talk where you explicitly say, this is how this message applies to your life, not just like
Mm,
assuming that they're like, oh, yes, this is
mm,
about, this area. Get them to ask the questions. Are you here, somebody here that's wondering, like, does my life have purpose? Are you here that somebody that's struggling with this sin or temptation? Are you worrying about shame? Whatever, like naming specific things and then showing this message is for you. So those kinds of things within their process of like, just think about these areas, and how you can incorporate it. And I always think it's so fun. This is also whenever I'm talking to like my husband and his talks too, like it's really fun helping people write a talk that I don't have to give either. And so you kind
that
of
is
get to
fun,
do all
isn't
the
it?
fun part. Yeah. And then like, good
It's like
luck. Let me
grandparent,
know. I
like,
got
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah, exactly.
grandparents. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's true. That's true. It is. And so sometimes they'll want me to look at their outline and their notes and give my thoughts. Sometimes they'll record the talk and have me listen to it, whatever. I don't, again, like want to begin micromanaging and making them do it, a certain way. But
Sure.
however I can support you and um, maybe just give like a couple one-liners that like, oh, remember you said this, maybe this is a connection or whatever. It's super fun. I love it, love it, love it so much. So
So what's the scope of that mentoring? Is that multiple conversations leading up to the
yes.
talk? Is it
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
Yes.
You know?
So in that setting, it's four conversations. The first
Okay.
is like very big picture, and then the next two are more nitty gritty into like the process and where are you, what is your opening and close, those kinds of things. And then the last one's actually right after the conference. So I'll watch their talk. So I'll get the video of it, watch it, and then give any kind of feedback after the fact. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, it's
Is
super
that
fun.
been a long-term approach that Steubenville Conferences has taken, or is that
Yeah.
a more recent
So I don't know
innovation?
how long they've been doing it, but I had my first summer, I had a
Sure.
mentor. We did the exact same process. And it's really good to have somebody at least tell you like you're on the right track. Also, something I always tell, this is like a good thing for any speakers, especially when you're have a talk that you feel a lot of pressure about 2 weeks before you give the talk. And to this day, I still experience this. About 2 weeks before, you're gonna be looking at all of it, working on it, and you're gonna be like, all of this is terrible. No one wants to hear this. And it's not gonna
Yeah.
help anybody. And I need to start from scratch and it's all horrible. And at least I like lay on the bed and like, what am I gonna do? So I always like to share that as well. Like, you're gonna enter into this phase. Push through it. Trust all of the other process and all the prayer that went into it when you're having this breakdown where you're not exactly rational. Um, so yeah, it's really good. I enjoyed that a lot in my experience too, just to have somebody be like, no, we talked about this already. Like, it's good. You're good. You're on the right track. So
Yeah, it's a sign that you're in the pocket there. You're in the
yeah,
right place. Going,
right.
it's just a phase
It's a
that
phase. Yes.
we all
Yes.
have to go
Tomorrow will
through.
be better. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. thanks for joining me and sharing your wisdom, your experience, the obvious joy and love that you have for this ministry that God has called you to. And actually, I'd love to hear you just speak for a second on that piece.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Like, how important is this as a call? As we talked about before we hit record,
Yeah.
it's not something that any of these other speakers that you're speaking with,
Right.
decided to do when
Right.
they were 9. There's not a career path that you can pursue like a
Yes.
doctor or a banker, but
Yeah.
there's a call. How does that emerge in people's life? How did that emerge in your life that this
Yes.
was a sense of call and you answered it?
Yes. I think when I think about it in my own life and I talk to other friends in ministry about it, it's almost always the same story. You don't set out to like, I would like to be a speaker. Like you said, like when I grow up, this is what
Right.
I want to do.
Right.
Generally, almost always it's you're doing ministry and
Yes.
you're preaching Jesus, you're speaking Jesus, you have this desire to share Jesus, and you do it in your circle where you are. And so
Yeah.
for me, that was parish youth ministry for a really long time. And then through that, met my friend Ben Walther. He was associated with
Mm.
conferences. So that's kind of how that all unfolded. And I was like, what? No way. I could never do that. And that's just the story I hear over and over of people just, you do what you're called to do right in front of you. Go where God's
Yeah.
calling. And if the Lord has this, then he's going to open that door and open, whatever that conversation is or whatever. And I don't think it's bad to like apply and, try to like pursue it in that certain direction. But for the most part, it's that same thing. Like, who is God calling me to share Jesus with today? And
Mhm.
where can I do that in my parish? Is there,
Sure.
and there's lots of areas, I think, in parish life too, where it's like a baptism class that's like, nobody wants to be there because it's not that exciting. Could you go and do it and bring the Lord to these people who want to have their child baptized but maybe aren't catechized? Like, what is the area right here in your
Mm.
community? And then let the Lord, foster and go from there and move within those calls. So we need
I
that
love
more than
that.
anything else.
We do. And, it's interesting. I was just, as you were describing that, I was thinking about how that plays out in the context of real relationships, real community. It plays out in
Yeah.
public.
Uh-huh.
But we have this interesting place now where we have video cameras and a YouTube channel.
Right.
And then I was thinking, well, okay, so can people just sort of elect themselves? And people do. But I think at the end of the day, it still is about traction. It's still about, if this is going to work, somebody's going to recognize that and invite you into something. And it's whether you're practicing in public because you're at a parish or you're practicing in public because you got a YouTube channel. I guess it's all the same in that if there is a gift, if there's a calling, that will emerge and be confirmed.
Yes.
And named and drawn out. And so I guess in some ways we have more options. We have all the options in the world.
It's true. Yeah.
It's great to do it. I think personally best in person with real people.
Yeah.
Not that YouTube isn't. But in some ways that's another avenue, I suppose, where people can discover a call.
It's true. And I think it's all about trusting what the Holy Spirit, if the Holy Spirit tells you, you have to discern it and you have to feel called. And if it is, that kind of maybe a digital kind of media or whatever, then great. And let's say that you have 10 people that watch it and not being discouraged by that maybe those 10 people were the people the Lord called you to make this video for because he had something to speak, and not being like, oh, well, I really wanted it to be 10,000, and being so. I think there's a lot of perspective in it and in ministry in general, like how much of it is me and promoting me versus like, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do and God can use it however he wants to. And that's totally fine. I'm just going to enjoy sharing the Lord and, the rest of the clicks and the follows and the whatever or whatever they are.
Sure, they are.
Yeah.
Where could people connect with you online if they want to learn more about you, if they want to bring you out to speak? Where's the best place for them to go?
Great. My website is womaninlove.org, which is my first book talking about being a woman that's in love with the Lord and how that transforms our life. I'm sure if you did Katie Hartfiel, it would probably come up as well. And then I also, so as I mentioned, my husband works for That Man Is You. And we just started a women's program that's going to launch this fall.
That's
So,
right. I saw that.
We're super excited.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. So
Yeah.
also through Parodies This Day, also, you can find more there. So that program is going to be called She Shall Be Called Woman.
Awesome.
So super pumped. Yeah.
Congrats on that.
Great,
That's
thanks.
really exciting. Grateful for you and your husband and all that God is doing in and through you for the church and for being a part of the podcast today. I'll put all of those links in the show notes and hope that people will check that out. Again, thanks so much, Katie, for joining me here
Ryan.
today.
It was super fun. I really appreciate it.
If you find this podcast helpful, I would love to hear about it. I'd love to know also what we can do to make it better. Please reach out on my website at ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's a little contact form there, or you can send me an email, speaking@ryanohara.org. You got millions of choices when you podcast. Thanks for press and play today. See you next time.